At 6:47 a.m., on a Tuesday morning, exactly 32 days before our wedding, I received an email from Ethan. It read, "I've met someone else, someone better. I won't be attending our wedding next month. I wish you well." 4 sentences. That was it. No phone call, no explanation, just an email. I stared at the screen in disbelief, my coffee untouched and cooling beside me. Our 3-year relationship gone before sunrise. I'd spent the last 8 months planning a wedding, choosing flowers, tasting cakes, booking vendors. And now, the man I was supposed to marry had walked out with the click of a send button. My name is Alysa Reynolds. I'm a 30-year-old interior designer from Boston. I built a life with a man who canceled our wedding by email 32 days before the ceremony. Stay with me to see how his betrayal became the best investment I ever made, and how I exposed everything with one bold move. We met at a charity gala in downtown Boston, one of those elegant affairs where the champagne flows and everyone wears smiles as carefully chosen as their outfits. Ethan stood out immediately, tall, confident, polished. He worked at an investment firm that had sponsored the event. I was there on behalf of a design client who had donated artwork. He offered me a drink, then conversation, then a ride home in a black car with leather seats and jazz playing softly. He made me feel like I was stepping into the next chapter of my life, and I didn't hesitate to follow. For the next 3 years, Ethan was everything I thought I'd been waiting for. Smart, ambitious, affectionate. He surprised me with flowers for no reason, took me to rooftop dinners and said all the right things. We traveled, built traditions, blended friend groups. He proposed 8 months ago, on the waterfront during sunset, claiming the ring had been in his family for generations. I said yes without hesitation. Looking back, the red flags were there. He always insisted on paying, even when I knew he was between commissions. Lavish gifts would show up, designer shoes, weekend trips, and I told myself it was romantic, not reckless. He'd get defensive when I asked about our joint account, brushing off unusual charges with charm and excuses. He worked late more often, took business calls in the hallway. His collar sometimes carried unfamiliar perfume, but I rationalized it away. He had a demanding career, I reminded myself. And I loved him. In truth, I did more than love Ethan. I supported him. When his firm went through a rough patch, I delayed launching my own design studio to help him network and build client leads. I connected him with 2 of my wealthiest clients. I let us use my savings when he needed to cover an investment shortfall. I even postponed house hunting so he could free up cash flow for a new business venture. I believed in him because I thought we were building a future together. Every sacrifice felt like a contribution to that future. I ignored my gut more times than I can count. When I found lipstick on his shirt, I accepted the explanation that a client had hugged him at a conference. When he left in the middle of the night for urgent work meetings, I convinced myself that success required sacrifice. When he began disappearing on weekends to reconnect with old college friends, I forced myself not to press too hard. I told myself trust was more important than suspicion. That love meant patience. I silenced the quiet voice in my head that whispered things didn't add up. I chalked up his stress to pressure from the firm. I labeled his emotional distance as pre-wedding jitters. I made excuses because the truth felt too terrifying to face. I was invested. Now I see it all clearly. The signs weren't subtle. They were flashing lights I chose to ignore. But all of that changed the moment I read that email. In 4 sentences, Ethan unraveled the illusion I'd spent 3 years defending. And what he didn't know, what he could never have imagined, was that I'd already started preparing for the day he'd slip. Because deep down, a part of me had quietly decided it would be ready. The first real crack came with the engagement ring. Ethan had given it to me on one knee, under fairy lights, claiming it had belonged to his grandmother. Worn through 50 years of true love, he'd said with misty eyes. I adored it, treasured the story even more than the stone. But after noticing the band felt oddly lightweight, I took it in for appraisal, mostly to determine how best to insure it. The jeweler's verdict left me speechless. It wasn't vintage. It was barely 2 years old, purchased from a luxury resale shop. No family heirloom, no romantic legacy. Just another carefully packaged lie. I didn't confront him, not then. Something told me it wasn't the only secret. Instead, I began quietly documenting, keeping screenshots, saving receipts, watching patterns. There were charges on our joint account I didn't recognize. $4,800.00 at a hotel in New York. $3,000 $200. 0 cents at Tiffany's. Multiple flights booked under his name to Chicago. None of these trips had involved me. When I asked about the charges, he blamed client meetings or business expenses. But I'd worked in high-end design long enough to know how invoicing worked. None of it made sense. Then came the lipstick, a rich berry shade smudged faintly on the inside of his dress shirt collar. I found it while sorting laundry, something I often did to make his life easier. I showed it to him, joking lightly, hoping for an innocent answer. He stiffened, mumbled something about a client's hug, and changed the subject. The next day, I found his shirt buried deep in the trash. Soon after, I bumped into one of his coworkers, Mike, at the grocery store. When I casually mentioned Ethan's late hours due to a rumored merger, Mike looked puzzled. Merger? We haven't had a major deal since January. I smiled, nodded, and walked away with my heart racing. That night, I opened his laptop for the first time. His password was still my birthday. What I found made my stomach churn. Dozens of emails to a woman named Claire, job search results for Chicago, conversations with realtors. He wasn't just cheating on his new city with someone else. In one email, he wrote, "I can't keep lying to Alysa. She deserves better, but I can't stay away from late on a proposal." That's when I sold the ring. The money, $15,000, 0 cents, went into a separate account under my name. I still didn't know exactly what I was preparing for, but I knew I'd need options. 32 days before the wedding, Ethan sent an email at 6:47 a.m. "I met someone else, someone better. I won't be attending our wedding next month. I wish you well." 4 lines to end 3 years. No explanation, no apology, just a coward's exit, delivered like a cancellation notice. My heart didn't break, it hardened, and I knew exactly what I needed to do next. Rachel arrived at my apartment less than 20 minutes after I forwarded her Ethan's email. She didn't knock, just let herself in, her eyes already blazing with fury. She took one look at my face, surrounded by wedding invitation samples and vendor receipts, and pulled me into a hug. "We are not letting him get away with this," she said firmly. "Not after everything." For hours we sat in the kitchen, poring over the timeline, the receipts, and the signs I had ignored for far too long. When I told her about the emails and the fake engagement ring, her jaw clenched. "You need to hit back, but smart, not angry, strategic." That's when she gave me the name, Thomas Hayes, a private investigator one of her legal clients had used during a messy divorce. She said, "The next morning, I called Thomas and set up a meeting. His office wasn't what I expected. Bright, modern, efficient. As I walked him through what I knew, he took notes calmly, his expression unreadable. I slid the manila folder across his desk. Inside were copies of Ethan's suspicious transactions, screenshots of late-night emails, and travel receipts. "This is what I have," I said. "I need to know everything." He nodded. "With this much groundwork, I can move quickly. We'll start with tracking recent travel, financial activity, and background on Claire Winters." I handed over a check for $15,000, 0 cents, the exact amount I'd made from selling the fake engagement ring. This was supposed to be part of our future. Now it's going to pay for the truth. That week crawled by. I distracted myself with work, design consultations, and long walks around the city. But my mind kept drifting back to the unanswered questions, the lies Ethan had told so easily. I'd loved him deeply, and now I didn't even recognize the man I'd nearly married. 6 days later, Thomas called. "Can you meet today?" Back in his office, he laid out the evidence with the precision of a courtroom attorney. Photographs showed Ethan hand in hand with Claire, exiting luxury hotels, dining at expensive restaurants. Receipts confirmed my suspicions he'd used our joint account to fund everything: jewelry, flights, weekend getaways. Claire was a pharmaceutical sales rep. They'd met at a networking event and had been involved for months. But it went deeper. Ethan wasn't just planning a life with her, he was planning an escape. He had massive credit card debt, personal loans, and gambling markers. Chicago wasn't just about love. It was about fleeing from the financial mess he'd created under the guise of a fresh start. I sat silently, absorbing it all. My hands shook slightly, but my voice was steady. I want to prepare everything. Documents, statements, photos. If he's going to walk away like none of it mattered, then he deserves to face what he built. Thomas nodded. We'll organize it all, clean, clear, and undeniable. That night, I gathered a new folder, not for pain, but for power. My revenge wouldn't be loud. It would be surgical. At exactly 5:55 p.m. on Friday, my doorbell rang. I smoothed my shirt, steadied my breath, and opened the door. Ethan stood there, looking freshly pressed, confident, casual. But what took me off guard was the woman beside him. Claire, tall, elegant, her eyes skipped once, then steadied. I stepped aside. Come in. They followed me through the apartment, past the framed photos I hadn't yet taken down. My living room was neat, sterile even, but what dominated the space were the boxes, labeled, organized, stacked with intention. Sitting calmly on the couch, flipping through one of those folders, was Richard. The blood drained from Ethan's face. Richard? What? Why are you here? I invited him, I said evenly, shutting the door behind us. I thought honesty might be the theme of the evening. Claire glanced at Ethan, confused. What's going on? Richard rose slowly. I've seen everything, Ethan. The expense reports, the bank statements, the gambling, the fake disclosures. You lied to your firm. You used company time and possibly client funds to support your side relationship. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but I cut in. Claire, maybe you want to look at that first box. She reached down and opened the lid. Her eyes moved across printed bank statements, credit reports, and surveillance photos. Then, her expression froze. What is this? She asked sharply, holding up a credit report. You said you were financially stable. You said you were investing in a property for us. Ethan's voice cracked. Claire, I can explain. There's more, I interrupted, gesturing to the second box. Emails to real estate agents, flight bookings using our joint account, jewelry from Tiffany's, charged to a card with both our names on it. Claire's hand went to her mouth. She pulled out the photo of the two of them entering the Peninsula Hotel. The timestamp matching the same day he told me he was at a business retreat. You said you were practically single, she whispered. That your wedding was a formality. That she was just convenient. She was never convenient, I snapped. I gave up time, money, trust, for a man who broke up by email. Richard's voice cut through the room. Be in my office Monday at a.m. I don't care how long you've worked for us. There's no recovering from this. You've embarrassed the firm, violated every ethical code, and now your mess is in my living room. Ethan turned pale. Please, Richard. This isn't what it looks like. But Richard had already grabbed his coat and walked out. Claire stared at Ethan in disgust. You said you were different. You're just like every liar I've ever known. She stormed past him and out the front door, her heels echoing down the hallway. Ethan stood there, surrounded by boxes of his own deception. Alysa, I didn't mean for this. I looked him straight in the eye. You didn't mean to get caught. He reached for a box, hands shaking. This could ruin me. I folded my arms. No, Ethan, you ruined yourself. I just turned on the lights. And with that, I opened the door and let him walk out, into the consequences he created. Ethan stood in the center of my living room, shoulders heaving, eyes darting between the evidence-laden boxes and the now silent doorway where Claire and Richard had both disappeared. His perfectly groomed hair was tousled from running his hands through it. His designer shoes shuffled awkwardly on my hardwood floor. It was the first time I'd ever seen him look uncertain, even scared. Lilia, please, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I can explain. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I got in over my head. I stared at him, unmoved. Over your head? You planned a new life in Chicago, bought plane tickets, booked hotels, spent thousands from our joint account on another woman. That's not confusion, Ethan. That's strategy. He took a tentative step closer. I know I messed up. But it doesn't have to end like this. I'll fix it. I'll cut things off with Claire. I'll tell Richard the truth. Say you had nothing to do with any of it. We can spin this. You've always been so good at helping me manage the optics. I almost laughed at that. Helping him manage optics was exactly what I'd been doing for 3 years. Putting out fires, making excuses, smiling through the lies. But not anymore. You're missing the point, I said. I don't want to help you fix anything, because none of this was an accident. You built this disaster one lie at a time, and now it's collapsing. He shook his head, panic rising. You don't understand what this will do to me. Richard's already furious. Claire's company has ethics clauses. My parents. I don't even know how to face them. I already sent everything to them, I said calmly. All of it. The bank records, the credit reports, the photos. I emailed your parents yesterday. Your mother called this morning. She cried, said she thought she raised a better man. He dropped onto the couch like the weight of that hit him physically. You told my parents. They deserve to know the truth, just like Claire, just like your boss, and just like me. Ethan looked around as if searching for some escape hatch that didn't exist. You've destroyed me. I tilted my head. No, Ethan, you destroyed yourself. I just refused to stay silent about it. He looked at me, then really looked. The desperation was gone, replaced by something colder. You wanted revenge. You planned this. I wanted clarity, I corrected. You gave me lies, so I gave the truth to everyone you lied to. That's not revenge. That's exposure. You ruined my reputation, he hissed. Your actions ruined your reputation. I just documented it. He stood again, trying to compose himself, smoothing down his shirt, reaching for his bravado. I'll find a way to come back from this. People forget. Firms move on. Claire will realize I was pushed into a corner. I walked to the door and opened it. Then you better get started. He looked at me, confused. What? Take your boxes. Leave. Go start that comeback tour you're so sure of. His lips parted like he wanted to say more, but I'd given him all the words I had left. Silence was my final boundary. He shuffled toward the door, picking up one box at a time. As he passed me, he muttered, You're going to regret this. Burning bridges never helped anyone. I met his eyes one last time. Some bridges are meant to burn. They lead to nowhere worth going. He stepped out into the hallway. I closed the door behind him. And with that, the power shift was complete. Not because I screamed or begged, but because I refused to be complicit. Because I held up a mirror and made him look. Within a week of the confrontation, the ripple effects of Ethan's unraveling life began to surface. Richard moved quickly. Ethan was formally terminated from the firm, with cause, citing financial misconduct and breach of disclosure policies. Apparently, Richard had been monitoring discrepancies in Ethan's accounts for months, but my carefully labeled evidence fast-tracked his decision. The firm's board, already recovering from a separate internal scandal, didn't hesitate. Claire's world didn't fare much better. Her pharmaceutical company had strict policies against romantic relationships with clients, especially when those clients were actively engaged in financial deception. An internal ethics investigation began within days. Rumors spread quickly, and instead of facing disciplinary action, Claire quietly resigned. Her once carefully curated image of ambition and polish vanished behind headlines and whispers. That week, I focused on work. I buried myself in projects, appreciating the comforting control of color palettes and floor plans. But the silence at night was louder than ever. I thought of Ethan's email, 4 short sentences that ended 3 years of my life. I wondered if he ever felt the weight of what he'd done, or if he was just upset about being caught. Then, Thomas Hayes called. His voice was neutral, but I sensed he had an update. We met at a quiet cafe, the same one where we'd first laid out Ethan's web of lies. He's back in New Hampshire, Thomas told me. Moved in with his parents. His father's trying to clean up the gambling mess, but it's worse than we thought. My stomach tightened. Gambling. The word had floated around before, but now it felt concrete. How bad? I asked. Accounts, thousands in debt. He owes money to a few private lenders who've started reaching out. His credit is tanked. He was living far beyond his means for a long time, and covering it with your money. I nodded slowly. Part of me had suspected. The expensive dinners, the jewelry Claire wore, the travel. None of it matched the financial struggles Ethan once claimed to have. He had been using me not just emotionally, but financially, to fund a fantasy life. I thought you'd want to know, Thomas said. Also, he's been trying to reach you. That didn't surprise me. Ethan had already sent 3 emails and left 2 voicemails since the confrontation. His tone varied. One message was apologetic, another angry, one pleading, then back to apologies again. He'd even sent flowers to my office. My assistant tossed them in the trash before I saw them. I hadn't responded to any of it. I didn't intend to. I didn't owe Ethan closure. I didn't owe him sympathy. I owed myself peace. And silence was the clearest boundary I could draw. That weekend, I donated the remaining wedding items, centerpieces, unused favors, even the dress. It was oddly freeing. I wasn't mourning the loss anymore. I was letting go of a version of myself that had once begged for crumbs of love. Ethan's carefully curated life had crumbled under the weight of his own lies. His job, his mistress, his image. They were all gone. And while he struggled to rebuild from the ashes, I stood firmer than ever, grounded in truth and self-respect. He gambled with everything, and lost. I bet on myself, and won. The $15,000, 0 cents, I made from selling that fake heirloom engagement ring turned out to be the seed money I never realized I needed. With Ethan out of my life, and the emotional dust settling, I channeled every ounce of energy into my interior design business. What began as a distraction quickly evolved into a full-on transformation. I wasn't just rebuilding. The first big break came from an unexpected source. Richard, Ethan's former boss, reached out a few weeks after everything fell apart. He'd been impressed not only by how I handled the situation, but by my professional portfolio. His company was redesigning their 40,000 square foot office space and wanted a fresh, elegant, and functional aesthetic. He asked if I would submit a proposal. I said yes, and poured my heart into every line sketch and fabric sample. My bid won. That project alone raised my profile in the Boston design community overnight. With the new business rolling in, I finally moved my practice out of my small apartment and into a beautiful brick office suite in the South End. I hired 2 junior designers to help handle the growing workload. The space was airy, full of light and information photos. It was more than an office. Clients appreciated my attention to detail, but what surprised me most was how many of them opened up about their own struggles. Over coffee and design consultations, women shared stories of betrayal, financial manipulation, and emotional abuse. More than once, I saw tears fall over tile samples and swatches, and I realized I wasn't just a designer. I was becoming something of a sounding board, even a mentor. Eventually, I began speaking at local women's business events, not just about interior design, but about turning personal devastation into power. I told the story of how I'd used the very symbol of betrayal, the engagement ring, to fund the beginning of my independence. I spoke about listening to your instincts, protecting your financial autonomy, and never settling for a love that costs you your dignity. The audience didn't pity me. They related. They applauded, and some of them hired me on the spot. Every new project, every client, every invoice sent became a step away from the girl who once sat stunned in her kitchen, reading a 4-line email. The betrayal that could have broken me became my launchpad. And, instead of bitterness, I built a future. The more I invested in myself, the more the world responded. I wasn't Ethan's fiancé anymore. I was Alysa Reynolds, founder of AR Interiors, known for bold modern design and unshakable integrity. My name no longer carried the echo of heartbreak. It carried respect. And every time I saw that ring-shaped tan line fade from my finger, I smiled, not with sadness, but with gratitude. It reminded me of the moment I chose truth and the day I started over, on my own terms. Almost a year after Ethan's email, I ran into Claire at a coffee shop on Newbury Street. We hadn't spoken since the day everything fell apart, but her expression wasn't bitter. It was calm, even kind. She approached with a small smile and asked if we could sit for a few minutes. I agreed. She looked different, softer, more grounded. Her hair was shorter, her outfit less designer, more genuine. We talked about work, about starting over, and eventually about Ethan. She said she'd moved to California after the fallout and found a job with a new firm. She was dating someone honest, someone simple, and happier than she'd ever been. I believed her. We talked honestly about how we'd both been fooled, how easy it is to fall for someone who tells you exactly what you want to hear. Before we parted ways, she said, "Thank you for not hiding the truth. It hurt, but it helped me see everything clearly." As I walked away, I realized how far I'd come. The woman who once cried over a canceled wedding was now running her own thriving design firm, mentoring other women, and living in complete truth. Ethan thought 4 sentences would end my story, but instead, he handed me the pen to write a new one built on resilience, strength, and self-respect. I don't carry bitterness. I carry clarity, and I wouldn't trade that for anything, not even the perfect wedding that never was.